Well, hi everyone. Thanks for joining in as well, because it's really nice to see like so many new people. But I'm just going to clarify one thing. Don't expect this to be the quality of a TED talk, because it has my skills of presentation aren't as honed as that. But my name's Imelda McQuaid. I have set up a business called Mindful by Nature, and that's basically to get people practicing mindfulness outside in nature, outdoors. So not unlike forest bathing, really, where you're outside engaging your senses, as well as mindful walks and mindful hikes. So just to really incorporate the kind of outdoors in your well-being. So obviously this is Mental Health Awareness Week, as I'm sure you're all aware of by now, and the theme is nature. So this is, so the Mental Health Foundation host or promote Mental Health Awareness Week. And this is the 21st year that they've been doing it for. But as far as I can tell, this is the first year that nature has been the theme. And I suppose, we've been in a very different year this, the past 12 months or more now. We've obviously had the pandemic and everything going on. So life has changed quite dramatically. But I mean, pre-pandemic, we were in a mental health crisis anyway, before it all kind of kicked off. So we won't know the kind of impact that COVID has had on mental health for quite some time, really. But the Mental Health Foundation carried out a survey last year and found that 45% of people reported being in green spaces was vital for their mental health, and going for walks is one of the top coping strategies that people had. So I don't know about you, but definitely I'm in that 45%, like, getting out into green space and going for a walk I'd just be losing my mind if I don't get to do those things. So they've obviously decided to have nature as the theme this year. So for me though, in terms of the pandemic, and this might be controversial to say, but one of the kind of plus sides that it brought for us was that it reduced the amount of distractions that we had in our life, really, in terms of things that keep us continually busy. So I know for some people that was really difficult and will have caused challenges for mental health, but for some people that actually allowed them time and space to go outside and find what was on their doorsteps and find nature locally. And there was such a huge increase in gardening and plants and so on. But one of the downsides, and again, controversial probably, is the increase in screen time. And although we're here sitting today on a screen, there's actually, it kind of, for me, became a bit normalized and accepted that young children would spend time on screens. And I have 2 young children, and I had a baby actually at the very beginning of lockdown, and there was baby sensory classes being offered online, via Zoom and various things. And prior to the pandemic, guidance for screen time for under 2s was nothing, like no screen time before you turn 2. But then come the pandemic, it's actually, there's classes and courses and all kinds of things you can do. And I think that for me is a little bit of a worry, really, that the children it's so accepted and normalized to have that amount of time, especially when people are having less time maybe outdoors. So I wonder, Neil, would you put on the thing? Go to the next slide, please.
Yeah, sure.
So it doesn't really, I mean, in a lot of sense, this is only an informal kind of presentation chat, and it doesn't necessarily need imagery, but I kind of really consciously wanted to use some imagery because it's really nice to look at that scene, and it's much nicer to look at that lovely road with the trees around it than looking at me. And it's really beneficial for us to kind of look at scenes like that. So connecting with nature is fundamental for our physical and emotional health and survival, as much as exercise and diet is. And I imagine, as everyone here is a member of Greenslate Farm, we all have some affinity with nature, whether we're an allotment holder or whether we just have an affinity with farming or green spaces or animals. There's something in us that kind of wants us to connect us to that type of, to nature, basically. It's instinctive, we instinctively are connected to nature. But despite the fact that we know nature's good for us and that it's it's kind of inherent in us, scientists have set to work doing loads and loads over the past 40 years, copious amounts of studies and research, and to prove why nature is good for us. And so the benefits are so wide that I wouldn't be able to share them all here today. So I'm going to just highlight a few key points, really. Can you go to the next slide, please, Neil? So how many people's houses look like this? surrounded by houseplants and every surface covered. Over the past 12 months, loads of businesses have struggled and closed down, but I know of 3 plant shops that opened. They were all online, but they all opened during the pandemic. And there's one here in Wigan that even delivers to your door plants, which is amazing as far as I'm concerned. I think it's brilliant. Can you go to the next slide, Neil? This, obviously, as Greenslate Farm members, this might be more what your inclination is to grow on vegetables and fruit. So there's over the past 12 months or more, there's been a huge increase in people growing vegetables, having their own pot plants. At the beginning of lockdown last year, I seem to remember it was really difficult to get seeds actually for planting, because there'd been such a mass kind of, rush for everybody to go and buy stuff to kind of get doing their own planting. So why was that? Why was there such a big sudden increase in people's interest in plants and spending time in nature? So there's one potential reason, and that is biophilia. Can you go to the next slide, please, Neil? So biophilia, a lot of you may have already heard of this before, but it's basically a love of life and all things, all kind of living beings, really. So the definition is a love of life and living world, and affinity for human beings for other forms of life. And so the biophilia hypothesis states that humans possess an innate tendency to seek connections with nature and other forms of life. And it's a genetic thing, in the sense that, our early ancestors were connected to nature. It's only in the past 5 generations maybe that we've become so separated from nature. And our early ancestors, they lived in nature, they lived with nature, they were very much connected and relied, on the seasons and everything that nature offered. And so obviously the better connected you were, the more access you had to food and water and survival. But I think that concept of connection with nature and survival is just as true today, because the more connected with nature we are, the more likely we are to want to protect the environment and to protect the nature that we have, as well as the many physical and emotional benefits that we have from connecting with nature. So as well as that, the very innate kind of connection that we have, the growing our own vegetables and looking after our own plants is good for us. Obviously gardening is good for us because we get out and do exercise, we get the vitamin D, we're spending time nurturing maybe a seed to a fruit, which is a fantastic thing to do. We also have Microbacterium vaccae, which is, if you just go to the next slide there, please. So Microbacterium vaccae is a naturally occurring bacteria in soil. And so it's been studied and proven that it has really genuine benefits for people's well-being. So it's linked to lots of kind of health conditions, including what I've listed there on the slide. So asthma, cancer, depression. So in terms of depression, it's actually known to have, there's properties present in the bacteria that have similar impact as antidepressants, which is pretty impressive, really, as well as having other kind of immune boosting properties. And I know for myself, I was really fortunate and got an allotment just a couple of days before my baby was born. And my dad had just passed away really suddenly, just a month before, like just completely out of the blue. And I'd been on the waiting list for maybe 18 months or so for an allotment. And that was just the best therapy that I could have got, having just lost my dad and just having a first baby, having the allotment to go and just potter around and get my hands dirty and dig in the soil. It definitely had beneficial, impact on my well-being at that time. But there's actually studies to show that playing and learning in the presence of Microbacterium vaccae can actually improve our ability to learn new tasks. So that's, hugely important for our children and young people in terms of increasing their opportunities to be learning outside, really. Some people actually encourage that we should do our gardening in our bare feet, so that we really kind of increase that intake of it, because we inhale and ingest the bacteria just when we're digging in it and in its presence, really. So yeah, so getting your hands dirty, there's no better reason to get your hands dirty, really. So if we go to the next slide, which I actually don't remember what it is. Oh, here we go. Right, so if you just take a minute, just a brief moment and just look at those images. So you might be drawn more to one than another, but just take a moment to look at each one and just think about how they make you feel. So just if you can come up with one word to describe how each of those images might make you feel. And if you're happy to put it in the chat box, do, or just shout it out if you're happy to share how they make you feel. Lovely, yeah, relaxed, peaceful, open, calm, yeah, brilliant. Brilliant. So I'm going to go to the next, or if you can go to the next slide, Neil, and I want you to do the same. Just look at each image and think about how they make you feel. Oh, Neil wants to run up the mountain. Fantastic. I'll come with you. So yeah, so now look at those images and kind of just get a sense of how they make you feel. And again, if you could describe it in one word, and you're happy to share it in the box. Yep, stress. Busy, yeah. Hurried, confined. So I showed these images to my 3-year-old this morning, and I showed him this image first, actually, with all the buildings, and asked him how did it make him feel, and he said sad. And then I showed him the other picture with all the nature scenes and asked him how did that make him feel, and he said better. And 3-year-olds don't tend to overcomplicate life much, and whether he was actually thinking about the pictures or something else, who knows, but I thought it was quite telling that that was his description. So the reason why I've shown that is, you know, the majority of the population now live in urban settings. You know, there's, I suppose in some ways it's become a bit of a class divide. Maybe only the very wealthy can live out and be surrounded by the fields, but a lot of us live in these kind of urban settings, and our sight is so important in terms of, you know, we're visual creatures. We create our impressions by what we see. Rashid's going to move to the estate in the top left. Seems happy up there. So studies have shown that the blues and greens of nature are the most restful, and seeing the greens and blues of nature can make us feel less anxious and less stressed. And the greys in urban scenes with all the harsh lines and jagged shapes can actually make us feel less happy and more angry and aggressive. And often a lot of that is really subconscious because we live in urban areas. We don't necessarily notice, but I mean, we're really fortunate here in Oral because we're very close to fields and green spaces. So we're really, really fortunate. So the difference in these two slides in terms of the imagery, looking at nature requires much less cognitive function. So the blood flow is actually changes in your brain when you're looking at those kind of different scenes. So when we're looking at scenes of kind of urban sprawl and various kind of buildings like this, our mind has to be much more alert and active because it's thinking about, you know, what is that? What can I see? Is it safe? You know, the roads, if you're out and about, you're having to think about crossing the road and where you're going. And there's a lot more things to kind of engage your brain in terms of safety and where we're at. Whereas in nature, we're much more evolved to understand patterns in nature. So there's such a thing as fractal patterns. And that's basically in nature, as much as you might never find two leaves the same, things, there's a familiarity and a repetitive theme, if you like, to how clouds present themselves, snowflakes, raindrops, leaves, flowers, you name it, you know, anything that you find in nature, snail shells, anything you find in nature will have quite a repetitive, similar pattern, and that's known as fractal patterns. And they're the same, they're the type of patterns where they're the same, whether they're tiny or whether they get big, it kind of still is like goes from small scale to large scale, if you like. But there's studies have shown that looking at natural fractal patterns in nature can reduce stress by 60%, which is quite dramatic, really, given that stress is such a huge cause for other health conditions, really. So yeah, so that's the fractal patterns. Can you go to the next slide, please? Oh, so this is just some examples of fractal patterns in nature. So I'm sure you can kind of get the gist of kind of looking at those images actually create what is called soft fascination. So there's just, you're drawn to kind of look at them and look at the pattern, and kind of a bit of an experience of wonder and awe about how they kind of develop and so on. So yeah, so if you just click to the next one there, please, Neil. So forest bathing, so that's a term that's become hugely popular over the past kind of number of years. And that originated in Japan, and their Japanese term for it is Shinrin-yoku. And ultimately that is engaging your senses in nature. So spending time in nature and really, you know, fully immersing yourself in it and engaging your senses. So what you see, hear, smell, can touch. And it started off in Japan because they actually they're an incredibly productive society, and they really, in terms of, I say productive, that's not necessarily positive. The hours that they work overtime are horrendous. I think they've brought policies in to try to change it, but they had hugely high rates of suicide, particularly among really men that kind of worked incredibly hard and incredibly extra hours. So they brought in the idea of Shinrin-yoku, of spending time in forests. And so it's prescribed there now to go spend time in forests. And it's a massive development thing where a lot of their forests and woodlands have been developed into being these kind of healing forests. So they have like specific healing forests in the country. So it's a massive boom industry, should we say, because there's obviously a lot of economy linked to it as well. But it's hugely beneficial for us to spend time in nature in a directed and connected way, because we can spend time in nature, and as with we do in any other kind of area of our life, we might not be present in what we're doing. So, you know, there was a study done a couple of years ago, over 30,000 people, about, you know, whether they were present in the activity that they were doing. And I think about 50% of people were thinking about something else while whatever activity they were doing, 50% of people were thinking about something else while they were doing it, because we spend so much time either worrying about what's coming next or thinking about what's gone in the past. So actually really consciously connecting yourself to what's going on in nature is what really makes it a key beneficial thing. But nature kind of lends itself to being naturally engaging and mindful, because there's so much beauty to see and so many interesting things to see. We will be caught by the sound of a bird singing, or the sight of some bluebells and so on. So in terms of the sound, and Neil played that lovely bird song before, we're surrounded by noise pollution without even realizing it sometimes. So even just within the house, I had to turn the wash machine off before I started this, because I thought that's doing my head and I can't think with that wash machine going on. The fridge going, or the bin man going past the house, or sirens going off. There's kind of constant noise. And noise pollution actually causes stress as well. And obviously there's varying degrees. If you live right under the airport, it's going to be hugely worse than if you live in Oral, for example. But 3 of the most soothing sounds have been found to be bird song, water, and wind. And they're the most soothing and relaxing sounds that we can kind of listen to. And studies have shown that when stressed people have been exposed to nature sounds, there's been a huge reduction in cortisol levels. And our cortisol levels are at their highest whenever we are stressed. So obviously it's really beneficial. And as well as that, you know, you've got the smells that are present in nature. So recently we've had quite a lot of rain, and when it's raining, the trees and plants, they hold on to their oils and whatever you would call their juices, their sap. And then when it rains, they're all released, creating that lovely smell, that kind of after rain smell, which is also got, trees are said to contain phytoncides, which are also meant to be stress releasing things that can help to release our stress. So if we just go to the next slide there, please, Neil. And so obviously over the past number of years, there's been huge amounts of research done about nature and its benefits. And scientists have gone out into nature and had kind of special scanner things that have put on people's heads to actually track some of this stuff. So the idea was kind of created by a couple of different scientists, I think, and nature enthusiasts, of creating a nature pyramid of kind of what we should have in terms of our dose of nature. So as I said at the beginning, nature is fundamental to our physical and emotional well-being as much as exercise and diet, but we know that we should eat 5 pieces of fruit and veg a day. We know we should exercise 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. But do we really know how much time we should spend in nature to get those benefits? So this pyramid has kind of been, there's a few pyramids out there, and this is one, and it's an American one really. So I don't think there's been a UK one created as yet. And obviously at the bottom, you've got what you need daily. And it's very small to read, but it would say, what really that daily nature. Mental Health Foundation are saying we should spend 30 minutes a day in nature. But actually, some people would say that we need more than that. So we need accidental nature. So no matter what you're kind of doing in your day. So for example, you're working from home on your computer, and we all kind of lose track of what we're doing, and our minds will wander. We might look around. But if you're able to look around and see something that's kind of natural, so whether it be plants or gaze out the window and see the bird feeder, or some form of accidental nature that you're seeing, whether you're walking to the bus stop or train station, or you're driving to your work, you drive down the tree-lined street rather than the street with no trees, so that you're kind of having that accidental nature. So some would say that we kind of need that accidental nature on an hourly basis. And again, it's that soft fascination where it allows our brain to kind of relax for a moment while we're kind of just enjoying looking at the colors of the plant or whatever it might be. And then as we go up, the weekly dose is said to be, we need a minimum of 2 hours in nature every week. And this is proven scientifically as well, that that's the minimum we need to improve our well-being. And so it doesn't have to be all in one go. It can be spread out over the week, or you can do it in one go. It's kind of up to you really. But the idea is that as the pyramid goes up, you're removing yourself more from the urban kind of distractions and so on. So, and then monthly to have 2 days a month in nature. So again, that could be at the beach, it could be in the mountains, it could be in the national park, but where you're kind of, there's limited urban kind of disruption where you are. And then annually or biannually, if you're super lucky, to have like multi-day trips. So maybe up to 5 days really is kind of the recommended, if you can do it, 5 days of being in the wild where you've got absolutely no urban disturbance whatsoever. So going out into the mountains where there's no Wi-Fi access, so whether you want to contact people or not, you can't. So that's the kind of what the scientific research has shown of what we kind of need for wellness in terms of our nature dose. So in terms of spending time in nature, it's shown to have a significant reduction in symptoms of attention deficit disorder. Spending just 1 hour in nature has shown that it can reduce, or it can improve memory function and concentration by 20%. And as well as all those things, it just allows us a break from mental fatigue, which I think when you're leading busy lives, which most people do, everybody needs a bit of a break from that sometimes. So nature, I will say again, is fundamental to our physical and emotional well-being as much as exercise and diet. And I think we need to take every opportunity to get out into nature. I assume everybody that's here already has a connection with nature, like I said before. So, you already know that nature is good for you, and know that nature is powerful in our well-being. So I'd really love to see, I'm really passionate that we kind of try to bring that to more children and young people who are said to be, teenagers are said to be the least connected with nature in terms of just how society is and how they kind of, maybe their interests are directed and so on, but that we kind of we all play a part in trying to encourage more people into nature for their well-being.